The applicant, of course, is the person that is applying for the insurance. Then once they've applied for the insurance, they've been approved, then they become the insured, right, or the policyholder. That's who that policy is written for. But underneath of the insured, you're going to have three types of insured. You have the first named insured, and additional insured. So let's break down those three terms. The first named insured, of course, is the first person listed on the policy, right? That's who's responsible for receiving correspondence from the insurance company. That's who's responsible for canceling the policy. You might see questions on the exam that say things like, all of the following is true except for what? If it says something like the insurance company has to notify every single person listed on the policy, that's not true, right? Because of the first named insured provision, it states that only the first named insured is responsible for those interactions and vice versa. So that's your first named insured. That's the first person listed on the policy. A named insured is just going to be anybody else that's listed, right? So say it's a husband and wife on a homeowner's policy. Say the husband is listed first. He would be the first named insured. The wife, for example, might be the named insured. And then you have additional insured. That's any individual that qualifies as an insured. For example, if a landlord adds a tenant to their liability policy, they would be considered an additional insured. So again, the insured is different from the applicant, right? The applicant is just applying for that policy. Once they've been approved, they then become the insured. And then you'll need to know the difference between first named insured versus additional insured. And then again, look out for those questions mentioning the first named insured provision. The insurance company does not have to notify everybody on the policy, just the first named insured. So that's the insured. Now we're going to flip over to the agent. So on the exam, you might see them reference the agent or the producer. Those terms are used interchangeably. I always say in the real world. In the real world, usually the agent is the person who owns the agency, and the producer is who's working for the agent. But on the exam and the material, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. That's anybody who is a licensed individual who is authorized to sell, solicit, or negotiate insurance policies on behalf of the insurance company. When you are an agent or a producer, two things need to happen. You need to get licensed and you need to get an appointment. Those are two key things you want to look out for on the exam. So not only do you need to get your license, right, which is what all of you are doing, you're studying to pass the exam, apply for your license, right? Once you start working, you're then going to need to get appointed, right, or get your appointment, which is that written agreement that will allow a producer to solicit or negotiate insurance for an insurance company in return for compensation. I talk a lot in my videos about the fact that there's a lot of synonyms, right? There's a lot of words that mean the same thing. So on the exam, they might refer to it as your license, which is what I would say most of us call it. But you also might see it written as a certificate. That's the same thing, right? That's just the document that authorizes an individual to act as an insurance producer. You're authorized by your state Department of Insurance. And then again, you will also need that appointment. Once somebody is an appointed producer, that just means that they are a licensed producer. They're authorized by the insurer to act on its behalf, to place, solicit, negotiate risk, and then earn commission, right? Earn that compensation. Underneath of that, there's different types of agents. You can be an independent agent, you can be a captive or exclusive agent. All of that I cover in my Ultimate Exam Prep Booster. If you want even more details there, if you're struggling with the difference between those, you can go and get our Exam Prep Booster. For now, we're just kind of going through the basics. So we talked about insured, we talked about the agent. Now we're going to talk about the insurer. So next up is the insurer, the insurance company, right? State Farm, Allstate, Progressive, right? Geico, for example. The insurer is also known as the principal. So insurance companies are principals of the insurance agent. So for example, if John Smith is the agent, John Smith would be the agent, right? Or the producer. That's the individual that is licensed, authorized to sell, solicit, negotiate insurance. The company would be State Farm, for example, right? If it was John Smith, State Farm. When an insurance company decides they want to move into a new state, for example, what they need is a certificate of authority, right? So as an individual, when we want to start working for a company, what we need is that A word, right? The appointment. What an insurance company needs is that certificate of authority. So these are the types of things you want to look out for on the exam. All these terms start to blend together after a while, so you really want to pay close attention to the differences in the terms. An individual needs their license and an appointment. Insurance companies, however, need the certificate of authority, which again is similar, but for the company. That's a document that's required for insurance companies to transact business. So the State Department of Insurance must issue the certificate of authority to insurance companies before they enter into business of insurance. So again, for example, if State Farm were to enter into a new state, before they do that, they're going to need to obtain a certificate of authority from the State Department of Insurance. So let's look at some example questions of some of that information we just covered. So first example question here says all of the following is needed for an individual to sell insurance except, so let's run through and look at what is needed. So A says, or 1 says a resident license in the line of insurance. Yes, right? You do need to obtain your resident license, right? That means you're getting a license in the state in which you live in, right? Your residency. He or she will need to be appointed. Yes, right? You need to get your license and you need to be appointed. So yes and yes. He or she will need to have successfully passed the examination for that line of insurance. Yes, right? Again, that's what you guys are studying for. You're studying to take your exam. You'll then apply for your license and then say you start working for a State Farm agent, you will then be appointed by State Farm. What you do not need is, as an individual, you will not need that certificate of authority, right? That's not for an individual, that would be for the company, right? If State Farm, say, was now going to start selling insurance in Massachusetts, for example, before they do that, they would need a certificate of authority, right? So number 3 here is the incorrect, or it's the correct answer, but that's what an individual would not need. Next up here says a producer's license is not required for which of the following employees? So again, you'll notice I always like to flip the questions here, right? So a producer's license is not required. We're going to look at who it is required for, right? So Kelly, who is selling policies and earning commission. Yes, right? She is going to need a producer's license, right? Anybody that sells policies, earn commissions, you do need a producer's license. Steve, who is a resident producer at Allstate. Yes, right? If he's a resident producer, that means he's taken his exam, right? He's passed over here where it says successfully passed the examination for all lines of insurance. If he's a resident producer, that means he did that. It means he applied and successfully obtained his resident license. And it also means that he was appointed by Allstate, right? In order for him to become a resident producer, he must have already done all of those things. And then same thing here with Jay. Jay, who works for State Farm as an appointed producer, same concept, right? He checked all 3 of those boxes. Number 4 here says an administrative assistant of John Smith State Farm agency that does not earn commission. Anybody not earning commission, somebody that's just an admin assistant, no, right? They do not need a producer license. So it's only people that are selling policies, right? Negotiating, earning commission, right? But somebody that's not earning commission is not going to need that producer's license. Let's look at this one here. So it says the subrogation clause is, and if you read through the different options, like for example, if we look at A, it says allows the insured the right to collect on losses from a third party in the event of liability. Versus B says allows the insurer the right to collect on a loss. I put this example in here because it speaks to the fact that even though these concepts might seem easy, right, insured versus insurer, this is exactly how the exam questions can get you, right? If somebody were to read A quickly on the exam, they might pick A, right? It sounds like a similar concept of subrogation, but that's not what it is, right? It's not allowing the insured the right, it's allowing the insurer, right? It's allowing the insurance company the right to collect from the third party. It's the insurance company paying out to the insured and then allowing the insurance company the right to pursue the third party. So even though it sounds simple, probably when we're reviewing this, you want to make sure you're reading those questions and answers in full and making sure that you're not getting fooled by those simple insured versus insurer. Especially with workers' comp, I feel like that can get really tricky. You really have to think about who the insured versus the insurer versus the employer versus the employee. You really have to think about who that is because they can definitely get you with those questions. And then lastly, what is a document required for insurance companies to transact business? So again, what the actual company needs is that certificate of authority, right? It's not an appointment, not a license, not a certificate, right? All of 2, 3, and 4, that is what the individual would need to sell insurance. What the actual company needs is that certificate of authority, right? So again, it's little things like that, the company versus the individual that you want to be on the lookout for. Hope that was helpful. If you want more help, if you're still studying, you're still struggling, go and get our exam prep booster. It's basically this, but you get over 10 hours of me teaching you every single chapter. We start at basics and we go all the way down through commercial package policy, business owners, you'll get dwelling, homeowners, flood, workers'